Good morning. Hello, people on the video. Hello. We're picking up where we left off last week. We're getting close to the end of this book, Stars Beneath Us. Stretched on a little longer than I thought it would, but for good reasons. We've had some good conversations. And even Donna, if it does get extra sciencey sometimes, in the end, it's getting us to talk about what do we really believe and how do we share that with other people and what does it mean for God to come into this world, all of this world with all its messiness and all its complexity, and how do we share that with others?
Well, I have underlined parts that I like. Good.
Last week,
We moved down that way since we're so.
it's up to you.
I'm good.
You're fine. The camera's got you either way. I think I've shared this before, but I think I figured out why Lutheran tended to sit towards the back of the congregation. I think that's why, because at the end, we say, go in peace, serve the Lord. And people want to get a start. Just ready
I'll go with that.
to get out there. So you don't want to sit up in the front.
I'll go with
It's a
that.
longer walk.
Yes, because I also think Lutherans are known for dashing out to eat after church.
You need fuel to go serve.
I think I told you this story one time when I lived in Rome. We had this guy, he was from Iowa too. And the minister be up speaking up there and about what time about, he thought the minute he would want time a minute, he thought he was there too long, he stood up and go. And sit back down.
And I think I would have gone like this. And you kept up and going.
Well, I think the leader has been known to go like that.
Yeah. Luckily, I'm nearsighted.
Oh, like this.
But he would do it, he'd sit up and go.
Yeah. No, at the first congregation I served in Minnesota, someone, as a gift, had installed a clock up in the chancel area that only the clergy could see. Like you couldn't see it from anywhere in the house, but from the pulpit, from the altar, you could see this clock kind of tucked in the side. You know, if we had two services, then that first service you gotta be in on time, but I don't remember the chapter and verse where it said your worship must last only 1 hour. I've been to an apostolic service before that was over 3, so.
Yeah.
But
By
he
the
really,
time we get to the announcements, that's a good 10 minutes right there, and you know, it takes the time it takes.
he would acknowledge him. He says, my timekeeper says I'm running out of time, so he would say something like that. But he would acknowledge him, but he never stopped. But he didn't acknowledge him, he was there.
There you go. All right, well, let's see, last week we had to stop halfway through. We got into this chapter 8 that's called Jesus Evolves. And it basically was saying, well, if it went back over his thing about if I don't, you know, he doesn't like the classical theology, the academic, what is it called? For the term now, but the scholastic theology that said, you know, God is away and far away and utterly different from us, and we're crap, and God is perfect, and you know, there's this big gap between us. And he, you know, has been arguing against that the whole time. Hey, Jeffrey. And he said this applies to Jesus too, and he kind of got us up to date on that. And so he talked about how there's even some religion classes now. Who you can't assume that people have gone to church. So they'll to get people to the idea of Jesus, they'll talk about Superman. And then he talked about hovercraft Jesus, who just kind of swoops in and zooms around, but is still away from us and different from us. My favorite lines from that first half was the plural of anecdote is not proof. That really had nothing to do with anything. I just think it's a good line. But there was this assumption that in a lot of theology, back centuries ago, some of this was declared a heresy, but it's still definitely around today, that under his human skin, Jesus was essentially superhuman, that Jesus was not like us. And so where we got to was that Jesus, the real teaching that emerged from all those church councils back in the day was that Jesus is 100% human and 100% divine. When you do the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, there's, you know, born of the Holy Spirit and, you know, incarnate of the Virgin Mary. There's always both. There's always the human and the divine. And it's not a mixture, it's not one or the other, it's not 50-50. It's 100% both. And then I think I just touched on at the end, what Martin Luther called the sweet exchange, that's the only way that Jesus could save us and forgive us of our sins, is that by being fully human, fully 100% of the human experience is redeemed, human sins are forgiven, but by being divine, that exchange can be effected through resurrection on the cross.
He had a conversation in this chapter about, the discussion he had with some, I don't know, his pastor or something. That whether or not Jesus knew
Right.
everything that was gonna be going on, or whether he had that all knowing, what he was there for, and, did he ever make a mistake, and he decided that he did make mistakes, and that he was evolving.
And that there was a difference between Jesus sinning and just maybe calling somebody by the wrong name. That's not a sin, right? Yeah. And I think we talked a little bit about how some folks really don't like thinking like that. I don't know how I feel about it, but
It kind of bothers me, just,
yeah,
not what to look at. Right or not.
Does it bother you when you watch The Chosen, and he, to me, he clearly seems to know what's coming, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And, yeah,
That's.
yeah.
Jesus knew that was gonna
so then there's that prayer in Gethsemane. It says, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but your will. Even if Jesus knew what was coming, there was still that prayer that said, if there's any way. Right. And he was by himself for that. He had the disciples waiting nearby. But clearly that story got shared and made it into the Gospels. So even whether or not Jesus knew, that doesn't mean he wasn't apprehensive. So there's, however we play it out, I think it's okay to some degree to say that Jesus had messiness as 100% human, just like the people around him. I mean, he gets into this, this is the next section. This is a good place to pick this back up. Is this section that starts on page 117. It's called Regular Person Things. Okay. But the last little bit that we covered last time was that, on the one hand, are Jesus's power and authority. Jesus is self-sufficient and autonomous. Is it Clark Kent or Superman, right? Or is Jesus human too, eating, weeping, things like that? What matters when it comes to Jesus? That's where we left things. When we talk about Jesus, what's important? The divine part? I can't even say part, that's technically a heresy. The divine or the human? I'll just leave it like that. Or both. What's more important? He talked about how some churches really stress it's just the divine, that Jesus has to be perfect and better than us and different from us. And, what does that mean then for us humans?
I think it's both. When God was not in human form. He knew us, but not to the point that personal. I think more, I think more, he had to do that to understand, you gotta live in you gotta walk in somebody's shoes to understand their situation.
Well, I remember Darren was bringing up too, that, it's difficult to think of the Trinity when you think of, say, crucifixion. Did God somehow die on the cross, God the Father, and experiencing death on the cross? That's something that theologians have bounced around for a long time. What does that mean for the Word of God to become incarnate, one of us, and then die and then be raised? What does that mean?
There no God for 3 days?
Or was God just on a trip to
Skee ball.
Yeah. Wait, what?
The movie God was skee ball.
Oh,
God was trapped
that's
playing
right.
skee ball.
It's a good movie. For a second, I thought you said SeaWorld, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, playing skee ball. That, if you haven't seen Dogma, if you can handle some colorful language, it's a really good movie.
It is a thought-provoking
Very.
movie when you combine it with the Bible and you start thinking about it, really, in this.
It's hard to find that.
It's
Yeah. I have a copy at home. But yeah, it's mean, George Carlin plays a Catholic cardinal, so.
Oh, that tells it all.
Yeah.
That tells it all.
So anyway,
But
but
so remember, God has a sense of humor, so did the duck-billed platypus.
right, and then you also, the Catholic Church trying a new marketing campaign with Buddy Christ, who's going. Sorry.
Yeah, but no, that, it's kind of the same thought though, is that.
Yeah.
Within the divine, if God is within the human form, that's kind of the premise of the movie, part of it, right?
Sure.
Is God in power for those 3 days where Jesus was.
Yeah.
In the dead, amongst the dead.
And then what?
Hell, like the old he used to say.
Yeah, either way, Sheol, Hades, hell.
Yes.
So is that, and how much do human doctrines have any impact on God?
Mhm.
That's another,
Well, you gotta stop thinking it's a Trinity, so part of him was dead and part of him wasn't.
or no, see, that's the same, that you can't do parts.
Yeah, he's three in.
No, it's not one person, no,
3 in 1.
one God, three persons, but
He's
that,
3 in 1.
right, but you can't say, according to my systematic theology professor.
Yeah.
Parts, you can't say three people, three aspects, it's one, always one. In three persons, one essence.
What's the difference?
There's books written. It's a lot of Greek words, yeah.
They're all frustrated.
But yeah, but that's the thing. So we have to be willing to live with some limitations and some imperfection in our knowledge of God. And that's part of the point of this book too. And that's part of why he pushes back against God being all powerful, all knowing and everything else, because how does that relate to us? How is that an idea that we can attach to? Because it's so different from our experience.
That's why I think it's 3 in 1 or 3 persons, because he's talking to God and says, take this away from me.
Sure,
He wouldn't have to say that.
sure. Or at Jesus's baptism, there's the voice, there's
Yeah.
the dove, and there's the
He wouldn't
words.
have to Say that, they weren't separate.
They can't be separate.
Ah,
What
I got it.
priest is to say, he thought the whole Trinity was just simple. He said, there you are, Judy, and there you are, you're a nurse, you're a mother, and you're a wife. And he said it's not any more complicated than that.
That's what I was taught.
Sure.
You know, you were taught that, someone else has been told it.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, you can be three things and
yeah,
you're the same person.
or H2O, right? Ice, water, steam. Same thing.
Oh, that's,
But then some folks would, some folks would, well, excuse me, if you, if it's just three different jobs, then well, like there's a whole, people make it complicated. But for you and me, it doesn't need to be complicated. For
whatever,
me, it just means that God is in relationship and we're created in the image of God, so we're made for relationship.
whatever floats your boat to get it to you, get it through,
And yeah,
through it.
but so what this book is doing though is saying, well, if it floats your boat, cool. But if you play that scenario out, is it hurting other people? Is it sinking other people's boats? Right, that's where it gets tricky. That's kind of our lesson today in church too. Is the lesson of Paul writing to the Corinthians saying, can you eat meat that's been sacrificed to idols? Sure. Should you if it's causing other people to question your faith? No. It's like, I'll stop eating meat forever if it causes somebody else's faith to fall apart. So it's about, what effect does it have on other people?
but if that person really wanted that piece of meat in front of the person that can't eat meat.
What it was about is
Temptation.
is eating that meat because it's been sacrificed to some other god or some idol. Does that mean you're then participating in that worship? Is that idolatry? For some people, we don't know. Lutherans don't do the Friday fish thing. You can if you want, you don't have to. But if somebody else is new to the faith, and that's really important to them to have those structures, quoting my own sermon right now, that you're about to hear, then don't. Like, and maybe the meat scenario isn't very relevant today, but there's plenty of other scenarios.
Yeah, ask her, she doesn't eat meat on Friday.
Yeah.
She was raised Roman Catholic.
Yeah. And if that's something that's important to you that helps strengthen your faith, then I'm not gonna knock it. I'm not gonna disrespect it. I might eat meat on Fridays, but if I'm with you, then maybe I don't. Especially if it would hurt their faith. And out there, like, do what you want, sure. But that's the thing, is pay attention to who's around you. So from his perspective, he's saying, boy, there's a lot of people that just don't go to church anymore. He's telling his own personal stories of falling away from the faith, from the woman that got hit by the car, from how the church didn't fit the world he was learning about in terms of science. He was feeling all these disconnects. he saw other people having their own disconnects, because it seemed like if God is perfect and we're the cause of all the problems, what's the point? So he's trying to combat this from a different way, using Job to say, life is messy and chaotic. But what did we say the last week? That's raw material for God. That's what God creates from. God creates from chaos. God makes things that are called good and very good from chaos. Maybe that means God is in our lives. Maybe my life does mean something, even if it's messy. God can work with it. And that all of that's very appealing to me. It's very appealing to how I can talk to other folks that maybe have fallen away from the church, who think religion is just a load of malarkey. So this is pushing on me in some respects, and you all too. But in other ways, it's giving, good food for thought. So anyway, we're gonna pick up with, this was the quote. He was like a divine spark on the ash heap of humanity, absolutely exceptional, and amid the muck of earthly life. So what does that mean? So we're gonna pick up on page 117, way down at the end there. So he says, in an evolving cosmos, Jesus evolves. He was fully human after all. Therefore, he had to learn as we learn and grow as we grow. Okay, so the thought of just saying that baldly, Jesus evolves, that could be a little unsettling, because you think it's the word incarnate, right? God is outside of time and mutable. But if Jesus was a kid, Jesus had to grow up. Jesus had to go through puberty, right? Assuming that, like any other good Jew, Jesus, had a bar mitzvah or something like that. Clearly, he was knowledgeable enough to teach at the temple at the age of 12. That's an important detail, because bar mitzvah happened at 13. That showed he had this before then. But yeah, Jesus had to go. There's this book, again, if you like irreverent things, speaking of dogma, there's a book called Lamb, The Gospel According to Biff, Jesus' Childhood Pal. It is very
Wild.
It is very irreverent, but at the same time respectful. And what it does is it explores, well, what was Jesus doing during that time?
The 12 to 30-ish.
Yeah. And one of the opening scenes of the book is Jesus sitting with his brothers and sisters, younger brothers and sisters, which is already controversial for some people. That Mary would have had more kids with Joseph after Jesus was born. Because some teachings say that Mary remains a virgin for all time. But other folks would say, well, it says in the Bible, Jesus' brother James. His brother, Jesus' mother and brothers and sisters came. He's like, what brother? You are my brothers and sisters. So one of the opening scenes of the book is Jesus sitting there with his little brother, and the little brother takes a lizard and bashes its head on a rock and kills it. Hands it to Jesus, who puts the lizard in his mouth. It comes back to life, and he hands it back to his brother to do it again. Like, what would it be like if you had the power to resurrect something as a 6-year-old? But they're right there, so it would have been unclean to put that lizard in. All right, so there's all this stuff with all these little. So like I said, it gets a little much. Jesus's buddy Biff has to experience all the sins and do all these things and then tell Jesus about it. Jesus isn't allowed to. So it gets into some stuff. Yeah.
There was an article I read a long time ago about, the way they chose which books go in the Bible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them that
Yeah.
aren't in the Bible that are about Jesus, and one of them apparently talked about Jesus as a young man or a young child, an older child.
Mhm.
And he used to play tricks with his friends. He'd stand on the roof and drop a pot of water or something on his friends. That was the only one I remember. Sure, because I thought.
Because why? I mean, why not? I mean, some folks wouldn't like that, but why not? Jeez.
So that one didn't make the Bible.
No. Some of those were written a little after the fact.
Yeah, probably.
So okay. So Jesus had to have grown up, right? Gone through kid stuff. It says, therefore, he had to learn as we learn and grow as we grow. Like ours, his understanding of himself, the cosmos, and his role in it arose gradually and perhaps fitfully. As a child, he probably looked and acted much like his peers. He clearly understood his religion early. He was teaching in the temple as a boy. But as far as his identity and his understanding of his mission go, I believe these things dawned on him gradually. A slowly developing identity makes sense to me because it is at home in the evolving cosmos and because it accords with experience. That's what every other human being does. You figure things out as you go. So much of an individual human life is driven by the quest for self-knowledge, it seems impossible to imagine any truly human life without it. Next here. And the next chapter, or the next paragraph here, yet he was without sin. He could have, how could he have developed as we do with all the difficulty, backstepping, and pain that entails without sinning? I don't know, but so often we claim this formula and move along without ever questioning our deeper assumptions about what sin looks like and therefore about Jesus himself. Some things we might agree are obviously sinful, character assassination, taking advantage of others' weaknesses, turning one's back on one's fellows in their time of need. These things are not only not divine, they are, in the word, inhuman. Engaging in them humanizes us. But what about less obvious cases? Does sin look like doing regular things regular people do every day? For example, does sin look like making mistakes? Maybe not. Maybe Jesus made mistakes. Maybe he sometimes called acquaintances by the wrong name. Maybe he occasionally forgot appointments. Maybe his grades weren't uniformly excellent. Was he a pain in the ass, pardon the French, to his parents? Did he go through moody phases, oversleep, procrastinate? Did he have, I mean, there's that scene at the wedding of Cana where Mary's like, go take care of this. He's like, this is not what I'm here for. And then, I mean, you could read into it a little bit of like, oh, who knows? Did he have annoying habits? Did he enjoy practical jokes? There you go, Lois. A little too much. Did he ever get drunk, even once, even a little? Did he ever win a bet and feel good about it? For many, the answer will be a self-evident no. The notion that Jesus was ever annoying, wrong, or intemperate brings him a little too low, some will say, and makes him ungodly, too much like us. If these questions offend, and clearly he's trying to exaggerate at this point, if these questions offend, it may be because of the near complete triumph of hovercraft Jesus over the popular imagination. This Jesus, due to his supreme knowledge and total control, would have always known everyone's name, made perfect grade, woken up on time, obeyed his parents, etc. In order to accept hovercraft Jesus, we must believe that humanity and divinity are necessarily mutually opposed to one another, just as they were in the medieval cosmos. Down here, beneath the moon, are absent-mindedness, poor grades, weakness, overenthusiasm, and insecurity. Arrayed against these things are perpetual and absolute presence of mind, infinite knowledge and power, total control, and complete certainty. These are heavenly, and hovercraft Jesus, in crossing the boundary between heaven and earth, brings them to us wrapped in the garment of human flesh. Okay, down at the bottom there, I do not insist that Jesus did every single regular person thing I can imagine. My point is not that he had any particular foible or quirk or limitation. My concern is with a Jesus who, over the course of 3+ decades on earth, never did any regular person things at all, because such a Jesus is not actually human. Such a Jesus is at once unbelievable and dull. Hovercraft Jesus is so far removed from anything I can even vaguely relate to or even hope to relate to, so unearthly and so unlovable, and so contrary to experience that I can hardly even work up the energy to pretend to be interested in it. And think about the Gospels. All right, name some regular person things that Jesus did.
He walked,
Okay, ate and walked,
fished,
Slept.
slept. Needed some time alone sometimes.
Went to parties.
Yeah,
yeah.
wept,
Got angry.
got angry, yep. Look those days. Yeah.
Yeah, but no reason, if he didn't do that, my way of thinking, if he didn't become human, there was no reason to come.
Who would follow him? If he was a robot,
Yeah,
Right.
why would he come if he wasn't taking on human form and acting like humans? Otherwise, nobody would,
I mean,
would stand off because he was,
Yeah.
can't touch that, it's sacred.
whenever God spoke through a bush or an angel shows up, the first thing is always like, don't be afraid because people are freaking out. And that only happened with Jesus when he used the divine power that he had to walk on water, to calm a storm. That's when the disciples would freak out. Multiply the loaves and fishes. Nobody complained there, they were hungry. But heal somebody and then forgive their sins? Wait, hold up. You can't do that. Who do you think you
If he'd been that way, he wouldn't have lasted to 35. They done got him a lot quicker.
I don't mind why you don't see any pictures of Jesus smiling, and I always thought that, but if he's not smiling, then that shows that he was very serious, and he was very hard all the time. It's not really bad at all.
Nobody followed,
From the parables he told, from the way he would, I mean, yeah, I can't believe that.
nobody would follow him.
But they follow him for a little while and then all of a sudden remember an appointment that they had.
Yeah,
What were you gonna say, Liz?
Well, I think this whole book is to try to help people who are having problems in their life, for instance, the woman who was run over by a car, how does this book help that person? I mean, one of the things that he said was that was one of the things that made him turn away from his faith. And so, if we're to help people who feel the same way, how does this book help that?
Do you have an answer?
No.
Okay. Does anybody, I could talk, but I do that a lot. What do you all think? Anything in this book that's helpful?
This book takes, it helps break down, again, with Job, they're getting back to Job, a very difficult for some people to process in the Bible. But it's taking it back to, we might not have all the answers for Jesus, but we can think about that we may not have all the answers, that there's things that we are never going to know and understand that and be okay with that, to wrap our arms around that. Having to come to terms that there's things that we're never gonna understand, never gonna know about Jesus. And he's challenging our thought. I think about the 20 years from the time he taught in the temple to the time we hear about him again. What was that 20 years like? If Jesus was to be fully human, he had to have teenage to go through teenage years like we all did. Very different back then in those times, right?
Yeah, he was working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he would have had to go through all that to be truly human, to understand that, to have the full human experience. And they say, I don't have sin, but if you had the full human experience, I always struggle with that one, because to have the full human experience, you have sin.
I mean, when you read the rules in the Old Testament, it's almost impossible
Yeah.
not to have something happen, even if you just like, get a cut and bleed on something.
You have to walk a mile in their shoes and know how things go.
So is that sin to follow the law and to do the rituals to have purification and to have atonement? I mean, yeah,
What this book clarified for me was that, and I said this term once before, I do not like the term in the image of God, because it makes people feel arrogant. And when that happens, you would think you're the cream of the crop and you're the top of the heap. And what Job taught me was, no, because the Leviathan is as much a creation that he enjoyed than he did us, that we weren't the top of the heap. And that, now, on the other hand, at the same time, we're the only species that I know of that understands mortality. So that's gotta be there for a reason too. So, but, the fact that in the image of God, I think that is misconstrued and misinterpreted.
yeah, totally.
And people then get arrogant to think the word, and then that says to us, well, then, like Job, we're the top of the heap and we can do what we want with nature and we can do what we want with this because we're the ones supposed to be custodians over it, we can do what we want with it.
Yeah.
And God's telling them, no, you're just one of those points in creation. I enjoy them all and I like them all for their reason they're here, and you're not top dog. And that's what I don't like that term. I think people use it wrong.
So I think that's part, Lois, is that kind of what Roger and Darren both said about Job and kind of changing your perspective. One thing that's really spoken to me about this that I think I will be sharing with other people is that there is chaos and messiness in this world. And that doesn't mean that God doesn't love us. Doesn't mean that we're left in our own filth, so to speak, right? Like that God is in the mix still.
God uses chaos for good somehow, but we don't quite understand.
Yeah,
Like he was talking about planets and I might be getting ahead of the game here, but I'm talking about is there other life, other places. My concept is if you're rational, there has to be. However, Because in the scheme of things, when he's designed everything. Everything is by physics, it has a particular formula. In that formula, there is a form of chaos in it. So he designs, it's like a football game. Everybody's under the same rules
Sure,
to play the game, but you watch the game to see how it ends because you have
you don't know,
certain aspects of that game that are chaotic
you're unpredictable.
and very unpredictable, so you want to see the end of it. So everybody plays under the same rules.
Yeah.
But the game can change because of somebody's inaction or overreaction. It's the same with other planets. Speed of light, the theory is anyway, that human life cannot run at the speed of light, it will disintegrate. So you've got boundaries that you can't cross. So you could have another universe in another, because the universe is vast. So you could have something somewhere else, and there's no way that we'd ever meet those people.
Yeah.
Or any time frame, because they're so far apart that time would not allow that to happen. And then they talk about wormholes, all that kind of stuff, which is garbage. But there is reason and thought and structure. Along with, and in that structure is some chaos.
And so that's the other part I would lift up so far, is part of what this book does is he just challenges assumptions. Why do we believe that way? And so it's okay to ask. It's okay to say, well, why do we believe these things? Why do we believe that Jesus is perfect and sinless? How does that help us? I mean, the paragraph I read about, you know, hovercraft Jesus is perfect. Down here, it's just all these weakness and insecurity, but Jesus is perfect. And what does it say? Jesus crosses the boundary between heaven and earth and brings all these good things to us wrapped in the garment of human flesh. Well, what does Jesus bring to us? Perfection and flawlessness? Or does Jesus bring healing and compassion and grace? I mean, that would be more the Lutheran line of speaking. And what is Jesus bringing? So it's okay to like take your church teachings and pick it up, look at it, turn it around, be like, well, is this what does this mean? And I think that's part of the book too, is that it's okay to ask questions. And it doesn't always have to be either or. It doesn't always have to be God is perfect and we suck. It doesn't have to be creation in 6 days and science proves it, or evolution. Nothing in between. Like that it's okay to have some, if not chaos, at least complexity. Because I think most people's experience in life is that it's not always black. That stuff happens that you can't explain, that's out of your control. But I would rather, and his point seems to be, when I look at the universe, I see things evolving and changing and growing, and we don't have all the answers. And if God created all of that, then it makes more sense to me that God also is open-ended. What is it? Open-ended, gradual, and continuous. That things are ongoing.
I don't think he mentioned that he's supposed to bring us justice and reconciliation to.
Yeah, yeah.
But boy, when I first turn on the TV, you don't see much reconciliation, particularly in the Middle East. So I just, why? I mean, why can't you jump in there and help out? It's terrible.
Yeah. And so there's different ways to react to that.
Are we like Judah or like Northern Israel before the fall? Do we behave that badly if we're going to wipe ourselves out?
Is this just we're living with our own consequences?
It's a human will.
Is this some sort of divine punishment? Or
It's been going on since the beginning of time, though, in different places,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes in Europe, sometimes in the Far East, sometimes in the United States.
It's our human choices are free will. Now, why he gave us that, I don't know. That's what the problem is.
well, to me, that boils down to, if you have free will to make your own choices, that includes the choice to love and honor God.
Or the other.
Because if you don't have a choice to love and honor God, then it's not really loving and honoring.
No, then it falls the other direction.
Because then it's just you're a puppet.
That's right.
Which is part of the plot of Dogma too, is that humans got free will, but other groups do.
I would love to see an outline of this book.
Oh, sure.
to try to connect all the things that he's trying to.
It took me reading it the second time to, the first time I was like, wow, this gave me a lot to think about. Now reading it and talking about it with you, I'm just like, okay, it's starting to come together.
Did that in the spirit.
Okay. One other thing I wanted to lift up real quick, this was on the previous page, I forgot to say. There's a difference between saying. Somewhere in here, I lost the spot. Was that. Are you, was Jesus, is Jesus fundamentally opposed to all things human because we're the messy ones and the sinful ones? Or is Jesus just different? That's something I was thinking about too. Because Jesus is 100% human and 100% divine, that doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus is, you know, opposed to humanity. I think Jesus is just different. And that makes him a savior. And I bring it back to what I said last week too. One of the earliest bits of Christian teaching in the whole Bible is from a hymn that gets quoted by Paul in Philippians 2. It's called the Christ hymn, that Jesus, even though he was in the form of God, emptied himself, taking on the form of human likeness, form of a slave, even to the point of death, even death on the cross. So that's our divine model, is that Jesus could calm the waters, Jesus could do these things, but emptied himself to be like us, so that therefore by dying and rising, he'd be lifted up through our baptism. So
I always thought it was interesting that his first preaching or his first teaching was to Jews only.
Yeah.
And so that kind of struck me early on, that he was somewhat human there. He was thinking of his own kind first.
well, who else would understand the promise of the Messiah but the people it was promised to?
Mhm.
And then Paul gets the vision and Peter gets the vision to start expanding it out. Because the good news is for everybody. And so if we are created in the image of God and Jesus is God in the flesh, then that means instead of saying we're better than everybody else, that would mean that we empty ourselves for the sake of others and we wash each other's feet and we go to the cross to help save others. I mean, that's if Jesus is God in the flesh, then that's why we follow Jesus. And that's the end of this chapter that we're going to get to in just a second. Okay, page 120. He talks, this is, oh, hold on a second. The wall that isn't. Okay, so he has you look at your hand, right? And says, you know, if you zoomed in on your hand far enough, you get to some water molecules. And he goes into this whole thing that I'm not going to do right now, it's the science stuff, right? About where the different elements of the universe came from. And how that water was all created a long time ago and has bounced around the universe, eventually coalesced into our planet and oceans and water. And so the molecules in our hand have traveled is basically the point of this. They've been around the block, and we are part of something much bigger than all of that. And what a miracle that is, he says. What a miracle it is that we have oxygen and hydrogen that combine to make water under the right circumstances, that bounced around the universe until it found the right place, and there was the sun and there was the planet in the right zone. That's the next chapter, and then life comes, and here we are. That's a miracle. This is page 123. That first full paragraph at the top there. I don't know what qualifies as an official miracle, but this seems like one to me. The most remote reaches of the cosmos are so close to us as to be us. We may have been formed from the dust of the ground, but the dust of the ground is star stuff, that's a Carl Sagan thing, prepared billions of years ago among the swirling lights of heaven. So we're not insignificant little specks in the grand universe. What does our life matter? No, we're part of the very fabric of creation, just like everything else. And God loves us just as much as the grass of the desert and the ostrich and the Leviathan. So that, I think, is another thing, Lois, that we could tell other people that are hurting, is how much God values every particle and how we're part of something so much bigger. If we ever feel insignificant or that wars and everything is just a senseless world. On some level, we are a miracle. We can't understand it. We're never gonna understand it, but God is in the mix still, trying to turn it towards the either revelation heaven on earth or Garden of Eden, whichever one you want to go with. Something where there was peace and plenty. People taking care of each other and creation. So we get through that whole bit, and then on the next section there is human like Jesus. Jesus is like the cosmos. Basically, he's saying Jesus is not separate or distinct. Jesus is 100% human and 100% divine. We'll pick up on page 123 here, the last paragraph. Hovercraft Jesus, all-knowing, totally in control, omnipotent, and in the end, utterly alien, because that kind of has to go together, is a fantasy we've cooked up because we don't want to be human like Jesus. In other words, we have made Jesus more than we can possibly be, so we don't have to become who we can possibly be. That one I'm going to read again, because that's a big statement.
We discussed that.
We have made Jesus more than we can possibly be, so we don't have to become who we can possibly be. Jesus does it all for us, and a lot of Christians operate that way, right? You accept Jesus into your heart as your personal Lord and Savior, and then you just live your life according to these rules. You know, in the end, I'm going to go to heaven. So what's the matter? By setting up a superhuman Jesus, a Jesus who has infinite knowledge and infinite power, and who has zero foibles, zero off-putting quirks. Maybe he had spinach in his teeth all the time. I don't know. And never once does a single regular person thing like forgetting an appointment or oversleeping. We deny ourselves the possibility of becoming anything like him. How could we ever grow to follow Jesus and walk in his footsteps, love others the way he did, if we've set Jesus up in our teaching to be so utterly above us that we'll never even come close?
That goes on the theory that God knows everything you're gonna do and he knew it ahead of time.
Yeah.
You don't have any responsibility.
Right. So he said that's hard to do, and that's why we don't want to do it. But that is exactly what he calls us to do. This is what I read last week in my sermon. One of the great moments of my life came when I understood for the first time that being a Christian is about one thing and one thing only, making a conscious commitment to follow Jesus. Follow me. That's what Jesus asked of his disciples. That's what he asked of Mary Magdalene. That's what he asked of the rich young ruler. And that's what he asks of us. He did not ask us to accept certain statements about him and reject others, or to identify with a certain denomination or church, or to work for particular causes, or to favor a certain Bible translation. These things may come, and many of them are important, but doing them or not doing them does not make one a Christian or a non-Christian. But following or not following Jesus does. To follow Jesus is to allow yourself to become like him in whom there is no distinction. It is, step by tiny step, to lose the distinction in yourself. To follow him, you must trust him the way he trusts God. It means surrendering your mind and learning to think with his mind. It means surrendering your eyes and learning to see through his eyes, just as Job surrendered his and saw the cosmos through the eyes of God. It means seeing one another, and especially the destitute and displaced and despised, in exactly the way he saw them, as himself, at once human and divine, with no distinction. Jesus would never have talked to that woman at the Samaritan woman at the well. Jesus would never have eaten with sinners, touched lepers, if Jesus didn't see something in them redeemable. And that, I think, is something we can definitely share with a world that thinks that Christians are a bunch of hypocrites. And the Christians they see are the ones, buying G6 jets with their parishioners' money.
Yeah.
Or the ones who are criticizing everybody else, but living real comfortable, right? Okay, lots to ponder. There's big ideas. We get the shout out to Job here, which kind of ties it back into the rest of the book. that Job's big revelation was seeing even a little bit from God's perspective. If we're following Jesus, Jesus is God in the flesh. How does Jesus see other people? As redeemable, as worthy of dying and rising to save. That's how we should see people. All right, well, you asked my final question already, I guess. What does any of this mean for you? Not just what does this mean, like, do we get it, but what does this mean for you? You asked that beautifully, you got right to it. Any other thoughts on that? And then we'll figure out if we dive into 9 or just let it be for next week.
I think it's so interesting to reflect upon, it, I can figure it out and have trouble with it. You know, like, and my volume about the Holy Spirit, the Trinity, God, who never wants us to struggle with the word. So that we understand more. Hopefully following him in a better way.
I was talking to somebody on the phone this week who's going through some cancer and some stuff with their family, and this person likes to ask big questions and get deep thoughts. And I said, I don't think it's a coincidence that Jacob wrestles with God all night. And then in the morning, God renames Jacob Israel, which means the one who strives with God, or the one who wrestles with God. And then that's the name of God's chosen people, who are our ancestors in the faith. So, yeah, I think we're supposed to be striving and struggling with the word, with God, that there's no promise in the Bible that this is supposed to be easy. So we're supposed to, hang on as best we can, and we might limp afterwards, but yeah, that's kind of who we are.
Especially as Lutherans, we're supposed to struggle with the challenge.
Yeah, that's our heritage, yeah. And part of the struggles now aren't just about, church doctrines and, indulgences and things like that, but part of the struggles now are how do we share the gospel in ways that people hear it, that are meaningful to them. How do we learn from other parts of the world where Lutheranism took root and exploded, like Africa or South America, and learn from it and not be like, well, that's not what we do. Like, there's different struggles, but we're called to always reforming, right? That's one of the Lutheran mottos. That's just another way of saying that we're still wrestling. Okay, let's not start the next one. That's 2 chapters to go. We got 3 weeks to do it, I think.
We might get it done.
No, we got 2 weeks to go, so we're gonna make it. And I will say, chapter 9 is a lot of science that we don't need to unpack. It's about planets and life being, how could life be possible, and all these things. So we can make quick work of chapter 9. So let's just do this really quick. I don't have a Lenten Bible study picked out yet. Partly that's because another congregation invited All Souls to do something for Ash Wednesday. And maybe we'll be doing it too. And so Reverend Catherine had their annual meeting with the business part last week, so she needed to survive that. And then this Tuesday, we're gonna get together and figure out more Lent stuff. So there's some ideas. But I was thinking, after spending so much time in this book, that we should get into the Bible for Lent. So any suggestions for a Lent-sized book of the Bible that you'd like to dig into? We have about 6 weeks.
Well, Philippians, you could do that, when you're talking, we're thinking of Philippians today, when we're talking about following in Jesus, would you do this? Yes, I do that. Would you do this? Yes, I do that. Would you go to following with the cross? Well, that's where the Paul stops then. And I thought that sort of in line with this. And it's short.
Philippians is a good book. It's good stuff in it. We could do 4 weeks on Philippians, and then maybe we could do a little application for the last 2 weeks.
But I'm sure there are lots of books that are good.
Yeah, 66, I think.
You said that are good. Not all of them are good. I'm not doing the Leviticus study. I'm done with Leviticus.
I will tell you, back in California, at one point, Leviticus was getting quoted all over the place, right? referred to, and I said, well, let's do a Bible study on it. It was good.
What is it really?
We had some really good conversations.
Revelations and James should have been taken out for them.
We did, we did,
Yeah, I don't.
there's some good stuff there, so yeah, we can pull some Leviticus out if you want.
Well, it sounds better.
Someday. To me, the one that I don't wanna do is Numbers.
I think about Lenny's Bible study, it's to be book, it's called, he chose the names. That was
Okay.
really like. Chose the names.
Somewhere. It's close. You know what we're gonna do?
Yeah.
I wrote it down, but I don't remember. I haven't ordered it yet.
Next.
Okay,
Yeah, it's an extra cover.
well, we'll ponder that, think about it, if you think of anything else before next week, we can. Keep the conversation going, but Philippines is a good candidate. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to those at home. And keep pondering, what does all of this mean? And what do we do with this?